In the previous lesson, we talked about feedback rivers and how they develop product intuition. We covered how feedback rivers consolidate feedback from different sources into a single channel. And we talked about how feedback rivers help PMs better develop their product intuition by removing friction involved in establishing good feedback habits and facilitating a more direct understanding of the user. But how do you set up your feedback river? There are 3 key steps. Determine feedback river platform, integrate programmatic feedback sources, integrate manual feedback sources. We've listed these steps for following along in the Reforge Feedback River template. The first step is to determine your feedback river platform. The most common platforms used are Slack and an email mailing list, but most internal communication tools work perfectly fine as well. The most important consideration in choosing between platforms is which platform has the lowest adoption barrier. In other words, how integrated the platform is with people's existing workflows. It's important to optimize for, because you ideally want everyone on your team to be regularly reading through the feedback river and developing their sense of the user. The lower the adoption barrier, the more likely it is that people skim through the feedback river from time to time. Since everyone at Wise used Slack for communication already, Slack was the logical choice to use for their feedback river. In contrast, since LinkedIn wasn't a Slack native culture, they set up an email mailing list instead. The second step is to integrate your programmatic feedback sources into the river. Programmatic feedback sources are feedback sources for which you can automatically initiate feedback collection and publish to the feedback river. Some standard feedback sources here might include NPS surveys, in-product feedback submissions, and churn surveys. Outside of these standard sources, think also about other feedback sources that give you user insight, but might not be those you typically use. Some examples would be help search queries, what people search for in your help database, and social media mentions, the product buzz you get on social media networks like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. A longer list of common programmatic feedback sources is tracked on the Reforge Feedback River template. The major aha moment in this step is realizing the value of looking at different feedback sources. In this step, PMs that typically only look at a few sources of feedback are looking at a much larger variety of feedback sources and find they get a much more holistic view of user sentiment around their product. For example, consider the unique perspectives that some of the example sources listed above provide. NPS offers you a unique lens on what users love, giving you a sense of what to double down on. These responses offer a great contrast to most feedback sources, which focus on the negative parts of your product that people want improved. Help search queries show you what users find unintuitive, helping you to improve your product design. And social media mentions reveal how your users describe your product to others, giving you an idea of what use cases your product best serves and how it's perceived. Consider an example at NoteJoy. They had been getting several user requests in their feature request tracker for developing an Evernote importer, a tool to help users migrate their existing notes from Evernote to NoteJoy. However, they had not prioritized it due to the relatively low request volume. What they didn't realize was that most of their core users had already committed to manually migrating notes or abandoning their archive. As a result, they of course didn't see much request volume on their feature tracker for note migration support. However, although only a few users requested Note Importer features, it was still a meaningful problem that was silently pulling NoteJoy's activation rate down. They realized this problem when they implemented their feedback river. Due to more regular use of the feedback river, the NoteJoy team started reading through cancellation surveys more regularly. They noticed lack of note migration tool as an increasingly common cancellation reason. This led to a timely decision to prioritize implementing the Evernote importer, opening up a large new user acquisition opportunity. Summing up what we've covered so far, it's important to get a holistic picture of the user from multiple sources in order to build your product intuition. Integrating your programmatic feedback sources is a great first step, but there are challenges to doing a good integration. The biggest of these challenges for most PMs is handling programmatic inputs at scale. They start to get too many inputs from certain feedback sources, which leads to other feedback sources never being read. For example, If they get a large volume of help search queries relative to inputs from all other feedback sources, the help search query messages end up comprising a disproportionate amount of the feedback river. This results in PMs largely seeing only help search query messages in the feedback river and losing their holistic picture of what other feedback sources are saying about their product. This then weakens their ability to build product intuition. To handle these scaling issues, there are 3 different types of scaling approaches you can take, depending on the data source: sampling, selection, and summarization. The first approach you can take is sampling. Sampling refers to when you publish every nth input instead of every single input. Sampling is most applicable to high-volume surveys. These would be your NPS surveys and your churn surveys. The N you choose is referred to as your sampling interval. To find what sampling interval to use, start small and adjust it upwards until you feel like you're getting a holistic set of inputs again from your feedback river. For example, let's say that you're getting so many NPS survey responses that you rarely see inputs from the other feedback sources anymore. If you publish every second NPS survey and it still feels like you're not getting a holistic picture, adjust it to every third NPS survey instead. If still too little, continue adjusting upwards until you feel like you're getting to regularly see other feedback sources again. The second approach you can take is selection. Selection refers to when you force the input to meet a set of significance criteria before being published. Selection is most often used to moderate help search query volume. For example, you might require that you get at least 3 or more queries on the same search term before it's deemed significant enough to push to the feedback river. This helps you isolate one-off problems from more systematic usability issues users are having. It can also be used to moderate social media mention volume. You might require that a post get a certain number of likes, retweets, shares, or views before publishing it to the feedback river. This helps you find the highest reach social media posts that impact how others perceive and talk about your product. The third approach you can take is summarization. Summarization refers to when you rely on a team to distill a large volume of inputs into its core takeaway points. For example, for NPS, you might rely on the marketing team to read through a whole month's NPS responses. They would write up the key takeaways in a monthly summary and publish it to the feedback river. Between these options, it's usually preferable to try using sampling or selection before going to summarization. Summarization is less preferable than sampling and selection for 2 reasons: feedback cycle slowdown and dilution of VOC. The first challenge with summarization is that it tends to slow down your feedback cycle. Summarization requires someone to collect a critical mass of inputs, synthesize it, and then finally publish it. These activities all add feedback cycle time, reducing the speed at which you can learn about user reactions to your product. The second challenge with summarization is that you tend to dilute the original voice of the customer, or VOC. Regardless of how well they're trained to preserve original VOC, the process of summarization naturally tends to result in some bias from the synthesizer. This means you risk losing some of the nuance you'd get from reading feedback inputs directly. As a result, we recommend using summarization only when you are starting to miss key user insights due to a high sampling interval. To navigate the downsides of summarization, you can do 2 things: faster summarization times, or more user verbatims. The first thing you can do is aim for more regular summarization cycles. For example, instead of having quarterly NPS summaries, ask for monthly NPS summaries instead. These shorter cycles enable you to get closer to a more real-time view of user sentiment. The second thing you can do is ask for as many verbatims as possible in the summaries. For example, let's say a key theme in an NPS summary is users interested in multi-user real-time collaboration. The summarizer should support this theme with the original comments that relate to it. For example, they'd list quotes like, "It'd be great to have multiple people to be able to work on the document at the same time," similar to Google Docs. Preserving the original voice of the customer via verbatims helps you stay more grounded to what the user is truly feeling. So, in summary, in step 2, you integrate your programmatic feedback sources and scale them with a sampling, selection, or summarization approach. This step alone is already a great start to enriching the quantity and variety of feedback sources you use to develop product intuition. The third step is to integrate your manual feedback sources into the river. Manual feedback sources are feedback sources for which you can't programmatically collect and publish inputs. Rather, you have to ask the responsible team to do some level of synthesis and then publish to the feedback river. This would include sources like support tickets, summaries of the most important themes coming out of customer support tickets. A designated lead publishes the top issues with representative verbatim quotes. Research interviews, summaries of completed user interviews. The research lead publishes the key takeaways with representative verbatim quotes along with a link to the original raw interview notes. And metrics investigations. Sometimes metrics move in an unexpected way. Strong product teams look into why these metrics have moved in order to refine their understanding of metric drivers. The product team publishes the metric movement along with the hypothesized drivers for the metric movement. For B2B businesses, this also usually includes sales plus customer success feedback, summaries of key customer wins and stories, as well as top customer concerns, and sales loss data, top reasons for lost deals. The top reason usually tends to be price too high, but there will often be product-related reasons too that are more actionable. The primary challenge PMs run into in this step is managing stakeholder input. The challenge is that in order for teams to keep on contributing feedback, they need to feel heard. However, it can be very time-consuming to help disparate individuals really feel heard. This is especially a challenge for managing inputs from sales teams. For example, if you're getting lots of feedback from individual sales reps, you often won't be able to action all of their feedback. Explaining your feature prioritization decisions to each one of them will help them better feel heard, but that takes a lot of time. This creates a dilemma. You want your stakeholders to give you valuable user feedback, but can't individually address all of their concerns. To solve this problem, designate product champions. A product champion is a chosen representative for a given team. All feedback from the team funnels through them, and they effectively act as the product's ambassador to answer questions from the team. Having a single point of contact for each team makes feedback collection and handling much easier because you now only deal with one person instead of a whole team. For example, LinkedIn chose to have one product champion from sales and one from customer support in order to better manage stakeholder input. Similarly, consider Asana, the product management software company. Asana's user support, customer success, and sales teams have each one designated manager who synthesizes the feedback from across the team. They're responsible for consolidating all input and prioritizing it into a list of top 10 issues for the product to address. They also are the most directly connected to the product team and serve as the main contact for understanding why specific feedback might have been prioritized over others. When selecting your product champion, there are 3 key traits you want them to have. Context-oriented, i.e., will explain the why behind specific feature asks. This enables you to better build your product intuition. Product empathetic, i.e., can appreciate that there are trade-offs behind decisions. This prevents you from getting into a situation where the representative simply demands features without understanding how those features will impact the rest of the product. And technically capable, i.e., has a basic grasp of the technologies you use. This makes communicating much easier. Once this is done and you've integrated your manual feedback sources, you now have a fully running feedback river. You now have the ability to frictionlessly look at a large quantity of feedback inputs from a broad variety of feedback sources, giving you the raw data with which to own your product intuition. In the next lesson, we'll cover another type of feedback management system, the feedback system of record. The feedback system of record solves the second major problem in developing product intuition: overweighting recency of feedback when evaluating feedback importance.